Hearing to order. Madam Clerk, call the roll.
Alderwoman Boyd.
Present.
Alderman Oldenburg.
Present.
Alderwoman Velasquez.
Present.
Alderwoman Sanye.
Present.
Alderman Aldrich.
Present.
Chair Spencer.
Present.
We have 6 present. We have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. First order of business would be the approval of the minutes. We have minutes from the Wednesday, June 5th, 2024 committee meeting. I will take a motion on the approval of those minutes.
Second.
Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Alderwoman Boyd.
Aye.
Alderman Oldenburg.
Aye.
Alderwoman Velasquez.
Aye.
Alderwoman Sanye.
Aye.
Alderman Aldrich.
Aye.
Chair Spencer.
Aye.
We have 6 aye votes.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Our first and only item of business this morning, legislatively speaking, would be Board Bill Number 1. Before us, we have a letter from the Board of Estimate and Apportionment, having held a hearing, a special board meeting on June 13th. The Board of E&A unanimously approved its response to the request from this committee, changes to the aldermanic budget and public, to the city's budget, Board Bill Number 1. This morning we have our budget director, Mr. Paul Payne, to come and help us kind of parse through the recommended changes that we'll be considering today in our committee hearing. Mr. Payne?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. As you had indicated, the Board of E&A met last week and approved a number of amendments. These are all posted on the website, and I'm working off a hard copy here in front of me. I'm working off that summary page, which is that lists them all, and then there will be details amendments behind them, but I'm going to be describing the various items separately.
Okay, Mr. Payne, you're looking at about page 3 in the printed document here?
Yeah, it is basically the summary of the E&A response to Budget and Public Employees Committee and other proposed changes to Board Bill Number 1 and personnel schedules. Okay? And also, these are grouped in 2 groups. The first half of the page is in response to requests directly from this committee. And the second half of the page are things that have come up, requests that we've received since the budget's been proposed. It'd be like grants and things like that that we'd like to incorporate within the budget. And I'll get through all these. Okay, starting with item number 1, it's the request for the circuit attorney, for the paralegal, and the computer operating supervisor. E&A approved that one. However, they did recommend that it be in Fund 1121 rather than the general fund. So you can see that was that $235,000 was moved over to Fund 1121. The second request, the circuit attorney increases that you all did earlier, that $300,000 item, that was also approved. In item number 3, the for communications division, the $82,000 there, that was also approved. By the way, that's Fund 1102, or 1002, I'm sorry. And then on refuse, as I discussed earlier, that was more of a personnel schedule change rather than a budget change. So what that does is that added the 9 HEO2s and also a labor supervisor and 2 foremen, and reduced the 10 HEO1s and the 3 utility workers. And so that was a net 0 change in the budget, but it got them the positions that were requested, originally requested in the budget request. And by doing those first 5 items, that's basically addressing the items that you had all proposed for E&A. So 6, 7, and 8 are equivalent of eliminating, basically addressing the fact that we didn't need the cuts that had proposed in this committee to address those. So this is restoring those cuts. The number 6 was the CJC reduction, and number 7 and 8 were the police department reduction. So those amounts are to reduce, to eliminate the cuts that were approved to accommodate your requested increases. And so that addresses the items that you had sent out of committee.
Paul, just
Yes.
Mr. Payne, we also had requested an increase in overtime for the refuse department.
Yes.
So there was one item.
Yes, and I can address that specifically.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, in looking at the projections for refuse, they are currently on track to spend $1.5 million. The proposed budget has $1.6 million. So we didn't see the necessity for increasing that beyond already, because we've already got a significant increase there.
When you talk about the 1.3, 1.6, is that specifically in overtime, Mr. Payne?
Yes,
They are projected to spend 1.3 million?
they are projected to spend $1.5 million this year
1.5?
through the 23rd pay period, and we've got 2 pays left. And then we've budgeted 1.6 if you look at the budget for next year.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure, since we had specifically had those
That's right.
requested items, that we went through them all. Okay.
Right.
And then do you mind kind of going through the other changes?
Sure. Okay, item number 9, personnel benefits section, that's a special fund. That's a correction that the portion of the personnel director's budget was not included in the original budget. That's at $37,000 and fringes included in item 9. Item 10, the Affordable Housing Commission requested an appropriation, an additional $24,000 in interest money they had. So that was requested to be added to their budget. The Juvenile Division, the courts advised that they are receiving an additional $77,000 from the Mental Health Board, and they requested that that be added to their budget. The Health Division is exchanging a few positions. They had one that was filled that wasn't in, and they wanted to cover for that, and so they did a couple, adding a couple positions, deleting a couple positions, and you can see that both of those cancel each other out. That's a net zero change in their budget. They did however, have a $10,000 items in their lead remediation fund that was not included in the budget, and those items, they requested that those be added. And then there was an additional grant fund, the Overdose to Action Grant for the Health Department of over $100,000, $103,000 that they had requested to be included in the budget. And that was, and then the larger item here on item 15 was from the Airport Commission. They requested the addition of over $590,000 as part of the cost of the airline negotiating team. And the way that works is the airlines requested that it be put in the airport's budget, and they also pay for it on the revenue side. So that's part of the process when they negotiate their airline use agreements. That's just how they manage that process. And so the airport requested that amount be added into the budget. Also, going down to item 16, ward capital. In the proposed budget, we did have the consolidated summary of ward capital, but we didn't have the detail by ward. We now have received those details, and so you'll see an exhibit for each ward proposing which projects will be worked on using capital monies. And then finally, item 17 is a language authorizing the receipt of $10 million from the state, which appropriated it this year for the continued construction of the PSAP. And so that would be authorizing the language for receipt of those funds and expenditure of those funds for that project. And below, you can just see where the increases and decreases balance out, whether it's increased in revenue or increased from their fund balances. And that's the extent of the proposed changes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Payne. Just real quickly on, so the personnel, we had gone through this in committee, and the personnel director was pretty adamant that it was already included. We found out that it really wasn't. I mean, was that just an error?
Yeah, that was an error. It should be. It's 15% of the overall.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, we had discussed that in committee and was surprised about that. Okay. Yeah. On the next two items, the Affordable Housing Commission and the Juvenile Division, one being interest and one being additional funds from the Mental Health Board. What are those funds allocated specifically for in the budget? Or are they just kind of the general budgets of those departments?
When the Affordable Housing Commission, it's mostly for their housing programs. You'll see that's their largest line item there. So
right, but is it going to salaries? What is it specifically?
No, it is that specific contractual line item for housing in their budget.
Okay, so it'll just go for additional housing.
Right.
And then on the juvenile side, the $77,000. one of the things that the Alderwoman from the 7th, we're discussing when kind of going through some of those hearings was that the programming was exclusively volunteer-oriented, and there was a need for, I mean, I think it's been highlighted by the now defunct Riverfront Times, but that, the juveniles are not allowed outside, and there's real need for additional funds in the sort of that side. This 77,000, is it allocated to a specific purpose in the juvenile division?
Given that it's the courts, I can't speak to the details of it. I know it's allocated to their health and safety services line item, their contractual funds,
Okay.
but I'm not as privy into the details.
Perhaps Isaiah, could we send an email, a request for what those funds will be used for, and maybe highlight some of the things that the committee discussed, including the points that the Alderwoman from the 7th made regarding, programming and that sort of thing? Maybe we can talk about that offline. That would be helpful. Thank you. Okay, Mr. Payne, did you have anything else you want to add before I turn it over to the committee for questions?
No, that's pretty much sums up the proposed changes.
Okay, thank you so much for being here this morning, for walking us through these. I'll go through the committee now in order of seniority. Alderwoman Boyd.
Thank you, Mr. Payne, for coming. As usual, you're on point and give us detailed information, so we appreciate your information. Thank you. I have no questions.
Alderman Oldenburg.
No questions.
Alderwoman Velazquez.
No questions, thank you.
Alderwoman Saunier.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have questions. They're just for clarity, for more understanding for what some of the things are. Can you talk a little bit about the airline negotiation costs?
Yes, somewhat. The understanding is that when the airlines negotiate with the airport, they collectively have a representative, and it's called the Airline Use Agreement, to represent them in those negotiations. And so they collectively get together and have someone represent them in those negotiations. That is incorporated into the airport's budget to cover that cost. On the flip side,
And
they also...
does the representatives, do they represent like the vendors and the businesses, or do they represent the city? Like
The airlines.
Okay.
It's the airlines. And then on the flip side, they pay for that cost that's incorporated into the budget. So it's a net zero in terms of the airport's operating budget, but it pays for itself in terms of an expense.
Thank you. And then do you have any additional detail about the adding of overdose to the action grant funds? What that, I assume, is something connected to overdose. Is this, we've already received the grant funds and we didn't account for these funds?
Yeah, I believe that they received notification that they had been awarded those funds after the budget was submitted, and
Okay.
that's why we wanted to include those in the budget.
And I know, I'm not sure if this is the same fund or a different fund. I heard some earlier conversation about the lead remediation accounts, that there was, I think it might have been something that happened in HUD's, like there was some kind of follow-up where we found out like some money was being collected, but something with that lead remediation account was happening or not happening. So I guess I'm just adding support accounts to lead remediation fund, or we're trying to add additional accounts to the fund that we already have, or can you just elaborate a little bit more on what that's for?
That was supporting supply and accounts. If you look at the budget, they had $10,000 budgeted last year. They had not requested or budgeted this year, and they said, hey, we omitted this when we budget, so we needed to include that in, and they requested it, and so that's what that is about.
Okay. Thank you. I think that completes my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderwoman. Alderman Aldridge.
No questions. Thank you for being here, Director.
Okay. And so, Mr. Payne, just from a process perspective, I know we have several members are new, and it's just always helpful to kind of review this. So the budget was presented to the Board of Aldermen by way of the Board of E&A. We recommended changes to the Board of E&A. They are now presenting us a series of changes that include the majority of our requested changes. Others. We have the ability today to vote on this bill and send it back to the full board. Is that correct? Just want to make sure that we're all clear on what we're...
And the process would be, I believe, that since there are changes from what you had originally proposed and voted on earlier, and there was ways of accommodating those increases by a different route, if you adopt this scenario en masse, or just like you approve this one, that will take care of making sure that those are enacted.
Okay. And that way we can get it back to the full board with the changes passed, potentially to be in compliance with our charter and having a budget by July 1st.
Correct.
Okay. With that, without any further questions from the committee, I will entertain a motion on the adoption of the amendments as presented to Board Bill number 1.
So
I thought
move.
we public testimony today.
Oh, do we have public testimony, Madam Clerk?
Yes. I
We
think we
do.
have one person.
We do. Oh, I'm so glad that you mentioned that, Madam Clerk. We had discussed this, and so I do think it's important that we take public testimony. My sincere apologies. Thank you, Mr. Payne. And we'll turn it over to the public, Madam Clerk, if you want to call on any members who have signed up this morning to present on the city's budget.
STL,
Do we have anybody? I want
we
to
have
first,
one person.
yeah,
The Connolly, to move him over, could you please?
I want to first just make note, it is fairly unusual. I mean, I realize we're taking public testimony here this morning immediately prior to taking a vote. But given that, we had an enormously large number of hearings, a large number of our departments here, our staff did an amazing job organizing that, setting public hearings and getting things together. However, there was a little a little miscommunication on the part on when the public testimony would be available to members of the public via Zoom. And so I do think it's important that we provide any and all members of the public the ability to communicate to the Budget and Public Employees Committee and the Board of Aldermen and their city electeds their perspectives on the budget. So while we're moving Mr. Connolly over, I just want to make note that there was one tiny little error, I think, in kind of communicating the calendar, and we're grateful for his graciousness in coming here today, as opposed to when there was an expectation to be able to testify via Zoom. Is he on?
Yes, Mr. Connolly is
great.
on.
Mr. Connolly, we'll ask you to raise your right hand once we can see you. There we go. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help us all?
Yes, I do.
Excellent. Mr. Connolly?
Yeah, before I start, could I just ask for a clarification from Mr. Payne? He mentioned that the document he was showing this morning was posted online, and I can't locate it on the budget document archive or on the Board Bill 1. So I could be missing something, so I'm wondering if
I think it
you
would
could
be
just
probably,
share
yeah,
that.
Mr.
Sure.
Payne.
Immediately following last week's ENA meeting, this was posted on the Budget Division's website. There's a box. It's a pretty high-profile box. It has all our budget documents, has the line item, the capital revenue, the presentation. The last item in that box are the amendments, and that was posted following ENA last week.
Okay. Okay, so I've seen like there are whatever 6 or 8 amendments. So that's the set of documents you were referring to.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Okay. Very good. Thank you. Okay. I'd like to focus. I did submit some written testimony on June 5th. I believe that's in your drive folder. So I'd appreciate you taking a look at that again at some point. But I just wanted to kind of focus on some of the comments in that written testimony. Most of them kind of pertain to procedures over at the St. Louis Development Corporation. So firstly, just wanted to urge you as a board to keep on the reform efforts regarding the allocation of development incentives. Ordinance 71620, while has some good provisions and has been improved with a couple of bills since, I still think that the Board of Aldermen needs to pay very close attention and ensure all provisions of that bill, including the consultation with St. Louis Public Schools and taxing districts, are all enforced. part of that bill referenced the scorecard for the initial evaluation by SLDC of projects. And I think there are some pretty major flaws in the scorecard. And the first is the financial analysis being done is not comprehensive. And we've seen that with both bills that dealt with the Midas Hotel projects this year. The most recent one regarding the hotels on 2601 Market, I think the Community Improvement District revenue was dramatically undervalued in that analysis. There was no information regarding the PACE financing, the new market tax credits, and on the document in the bill, the line item for the sales tax exemption on materials was zero, where in fact, LCRA last month just approved, they've got to vote twice, and they took the initial vote to allocate that sales tax exemption. So I think as a board, I don't think the HUD's committee or the full board are getting the full picture in terms of evaluating these. So I'd really like to urge you to sit down with SLDC and tighten up the provisions on that board bill. Also, I think it's important that the board vote on some of the incentives that currently are just funneled through either LCRA, the Industrial Development Authority, Port Authority, the SLDC board itself when it comes to the new market tax credits, and also the Clean Energy Development Board, which just got named in the last few days by a contractor who's claiming that they weren't paid by Lux Living on the Soho development, which in addition to the tax abatement and the sales tax exemption, also received PACE financing. That particular board is actually a political subdivision, members appointed by the mayor. It's pretty obscure, but I really feel for public accountability and transparency's sake, those incentives should also go through the Board of Aldermen. And lastly, on taxing districts, I think there's still a lot of confusion as to what role SLDC is playing. It states that it isn't involved in the establishment and oversight of the districts, yet the revenue from those site SIDs and the transportation development districts, is basically controlled by the developer because they have most seats on the board. And I think that's very bad practice, and that the developer shouldn't have a majority of seats, and that includes their attorney, and that really we need to have the mayor, the Board of Aldermen, and the Comptroller's Office all represented, so that really, the people that the city, that the public has elected to represent us, that they have the majority of seats on the board, because this revenue is tax-free revenue to the developer, and I believe it's not being accounted for correctly in the evaluation of the financial analysis. So instead of St. Louis Public Schools and city services being the first, the first area of government that is impacted by tax abatements, it really should be the last. And if there's a robust revenue through a SID for a hotel that's got lots of revenue from a flat rate on rooms and from the sales tax generated at restaurants and room rates, that should be dedicated to the developer first, rather than, a $7 million tax abatement that diverts $4 million from the public schools over the duration of the abatement. So those are my main comments. I'd be happy to take any questions from you.
Thank you, Mr. Connolly. Did we have any questions for Mr. Connolly from members of the board, members of the committee? My apologies. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Connolly.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, with that, I will take a, Madam Clerk, do we have any other members of the public? Is it just the one? Okay.
No.
Okay, thank you. I will take a motion on the approval of the adoption, of the amendments to Board Bill number 1.
So moved.
Second.
Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Alderwoman Boyd,
Aye.
Alderman Oldenburg.
Aye.
Alderwoman Velazquez. Alderwoman Sanye.
Aye.
Alderman Aldrich.
Aye.
Chair Spencer.
Aye.
Alderwoman Velazquez. We have 5 aye votes.
With that, you sustain the motion.
With that, we sustain the motion and we have adopted the amendments to Board Bill number 1. I'll now entertain a motion on the passage of, excuse me, I would say to move to pass Board Bill number 1 out of committee with a due pass recommendation.
So moved.
Board Bill number 1 as amended.
Excuse me, Board Bill number 1 as amended with a due pass recommendation. Thank you.
So moved.
Second.
Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderwoman Boyd.
Aye.
Alderman Oldenburg.
Aye.
Alderwoman Velazquez. Alderwoman Sanye.
Aye.
Alderman Aldrich.
Aye.
Chair Spencer.
Aye.
Alderwoman Velazquez. We have 5 aye votes.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. That concludes our business for today. I just wanted to, again, reiterate just how much work has gone into the consideration of this year's budget on the part of the committee. And so many members of city staff, including our Clerk Kennedy, who really did an enormous amount of work kind of guiding Isaiah, guiding the rest of the team and keeping us in line. Obviously, Clerk Ora, who kept us actually moving through each one of our committee hearings. STL TV, who's just done an enormous amount of work here in studio, obviously, but keeping us all on Zoom and making sure that our public hearings off-site were done flawlessly. We really appreciate all your work. All the associate clerks and secretaries who made the logistics possible, and all of our LAs, Ryan Coleman, who isn't here today, but has really kept us on track and really helped us. The members of the Board of ENA for hearing our concerns, making adjustments. Obviously, Mr. Paul Payne for organizing the budget and making sure we can kind of consider all the ins and outs of it with an extraordinary amount of fairness to all members and just being so accessible to all of us throughout this process, with probably the smallest staff of any department. I know you have the unfortunate responsibility of cutting departments, and certainly I think yours just comes to us with being very, very, very lean. And of course, Isaiah, who has really helped, really organized the whole process and kept us fed and mostly happy through such a long process here through this budget cycle. Any other comments? I'm sure I've left somebody out, unfortunately. Any members of the committee have any final parting thoughts before we conclude this year's budget cycle?
I was waiting to get addressed.
Alderman from the 14th. Recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Just echo a lot of what you said. I think this is the second year in a row where historically the Budget Committee probably don't make changes, but been able to get some changes over to ENA. So I also want to thank Comptroller Darlene Green, President Megan Green, and Madam Mayor Jones, who accepted these changes. And especially the President Office was working with the board to make sure that our changes got across the finish line. So, and then again, thank you for your leadership on leading this budget committee forward. Thank you.
Any other members? Okay. Thank you. You could, everybody could echo.
I can say
We can,
I can say something.
but really the members here showing up day after day after day after day charter really requires us to consider this budget bill every single day until we get it passed, and we fulfilled that. It was a lot of work, but I think we all learned a lot about city departments, what we can do and don't fund, and some of the ins and outs, which is important not only to passing the city's budget, but just understanding how our city works. And hearing from our departments is just so valuable for the members of this committee, but also for the members of the public. With that, that concludes our order of business for today. With that, I make a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Hearing no objections, this concludes our budget cycle this year.